How's that for a slice of fried gold?
You think this is a fucking costume? This is a way of life.
I'll be back.
There's a flesh wound. I'm not gonna hurt you. I'm just gonna bash your brains.
Take your sticking paws off me, you damn dirty ape!
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
I guess everyone's entitled to one good scare, huh?
Consumer recreation
Systems?
systems.
I think so.
You'd think after you just spent all that time being frustrated about how much work we put into this podcast to not
I
fucking know the
don't know
name
what-
of the major company.
Consumer. Well, that's part of the joke of the name in the movie is that it's so generic.
Yeah.
because
Well, they give it like those initials like a bunch of different meanings throughout the movie too. There's like different.
because there's a couple different jokes about like they sound like a company that sells racquetball rackets and stuff like that, so that was intentional. So I'm just falling into their plan. I'm playing the fucking game right now. I didn't even know it.
I was looking for it. I saw this one time. Oh yeah, throughout the film, the CRS initials stand for several names: California Regal Sedans, Cable Repair Services, Consumer Recreation Services.
Right, but the actual name of the company is Consumer Recreation Services. But then they use like the cable repair is just like their disguise van and stuff that they use. But the actual company is Consumer whatever you just said. I cannot remember.
All right. Well, anyway, hello and welcome to Cinema Shock. This is the podcast that explores the stories behind your favorite cult and genre films. We do all the research so that you don't have to. We're the guys telling you everything you need to know about your favorite movies and the people who made them, so that the next time you're caught up in a nerdy movie conversation. I'm not retaking that.
No, just keep going.
Not only will you're gonna know what's happening, and you might be smart about it. I'm one of your hosts, Gary Horne.
I am co-host Justin Bishop.
I feel like my joke is irrelevant now.
Most of your jokes are, Todd.
That's true. Available for parties, bar mitzvahs, corporate events. And I'm writer-comedian Mr. Todd A. Davis. Thank you for joining us for episode 4 in our series looking at the works of David Fincher, titled Rules of the Game. And just a note to recap, we are not in any way affiliated with CRS. Seriously, we aren't. This isn't part of the movie. We're not trying to make your life fun, so just don't worry about it and react normally.
That we did kind of make that joke irrelevant, didn't we?
Yeah.
All right. Well, we're finally fucking here. It's been we've had a day, the three of us, trying to get this recording going. So if you thank you for joining us. It's gonna be fun. We're having fun.
Yeah,
That's what we're all about here. It's fun over everything here at the Cinema Shock podcast.
The cinema. What does the R stand for? If CRS is
It's
cinema,
the R word. It has to be something, but
Rim
it can't
job.
be.
not the R word.
It can't be the R word.
Although I do have to say that when I think of the three of us, that is the first R word that comes to mind. Let's be honest.
Yeah. Well, probably most of the listeners feel the same.
Inappropriate. Anyway, so after that whole Alien 3 fiasco, we talked about that for 2 episodes. We talked about that. David Fincher was all but ready to quit filmmaking completely, but thankfully, both for him and for us, his experience on Seven seemed to rekindle his love of the craft, and its success helped to properly launch his career as a feature film director. In an interview from Film and Video magazine in 1997, the journalist who was interviewing him, Ian Blair, asked Fincher point blank, he said, "Was Seven's success a vindication for you after the problems of Alien 3? To which Fincher replied, quote, "Not really. I'm in this for the long haul, for a career." Hitchcock made 75 movies, and 6 of them are amazing, while 35 no one will ever speak about again. Unfortunately, we live in a day and age when it takes 2 years to make a movie. I guess I'm just slow, but I will never make 75 movies. So for Fincher, what he's saying is like every movie needs to count. There's no filler here. After Alien 3, he vowed to never cede control of his films to anyone else, and he was determined to never again just be a director for hire. He made the decision to choose his projects carefully, to only direct films that he felt passionately about, and the success of Seven luckily gave him the freedom to do so. So and it's funny, I think, that he name drops Hitchcock in that quote, because the film that he chose as his follow-up to Seven is, in my opinion at least, the most Hitchcockian film that Fincher ever made. Or at least it's the most Hitchcockian film in the series that we're doing right now, because Gone Girl, which was released later on, definitely gives it a run for its money in that department.
You said Cockian.
Well, that's why we pay you the big bucks, Todd, for that astute commentary. Thank you.
Mhm. Yep.
Well, anyway,
glad to be here.
The film that we are talking about, and the subject of this episode, is his 1997 thriller, The Game.
What do you get for the man who has everything? Everything. October 12th, Nikki's birthday. This is for you.
Consumer Recreation Services.
Call that number.
Why?
They make your life fun.
What are you selling?
It's a game,
Game.
specifically tailored for each participant. One day, your game begins. You either love it or hate it.
Why are you following me? Find out about a company called Consumer Recreation Services.
They won't stop, Nick. I paid the bill. I paid them more to make it stop.
They're trying to kill me.
Who's behind this? Why?
This is all the game.
They make your life fun.
What do you get for a podcast listener who has this episode? Well, we do have spoilers. It might just sound like a lot of fantasy role-playing nonsense, but we're pulling back the curtain. We're going to introduce you to the wizard. I'm not wearing underwear, okay? There, I said it. Satisfied?
That really sounds like you're referring to your dick as the wizard in that quote.
Yeah, it is. It is.
Wow. Does it wear a funny hat?
Listen, for more on that, I'm going to need you to subscribe to Patreon.
Patreon or OnlyFans? Todd's like, whatever it takes. Whatever it takes.
Whatever puts gas in the tank, man.
So The Game began its life as a spec script written by the screenwriting team of John Brancato and Michael Ferris in 1991, around the time that Fincher was hard at work on Alien 3. The script was then sold to MGM that very same year. It sold very quickly, and then it was quickly put into development with Jonathan Mostow in the director's chair and Kyle MacLachlan. This is right after Twin Peaks. Kyle MacLachlan and Bridget Fonda slated for the lead roles. But by 1993, development at MGM had stalled and the script went into turnaround, at which point producer Steve Golan purchased the script from MGM. Golan was, I don't think that we talked about him early on in this series, but Golan was actually the CEO and co-founder of Propaganda Films, which was the music and video and commercial company that Fincher himself had helped to build. We talked all about that in episode 1 of this series. So with Golan and Propaganda involved, the project moved from MGM to the much smaller Polygram Entertainment. And then somewhere during this whole time that the project was being shuffled around, Jonathan Mostow dropped out, probably when it went to Polygram. I would imagine he was probably, working with MGM, and when it went to Polygram, I couldn't confirm that, but that would be my best guess. He dropped out. Although he does, if you watch the movie, you'll see that he does still receive an executive producer credit on the final film.
I'm always curious as to what, when people drop out of a film but still get a credit. I wonder, is that a contractual obligation or something?
It probably is a contractual thing, I would guess.
Okay.
Because he was probably already involved, at least somewhat, in the development of the film before he dropped out. So he had put work into it. So there was probably something in his contract. Because even you'll see on like the Batman movies, Batman Forever and Batman and Robin, at least on Batman Forever, I know Tim Burton is an executive producer. Because he was slated to be the director of the next Batman film, so I imagine that has something to do with, like, he's still getting paid, basically.
Not to keep beating this dead horse, but I wonder if maybe even it's a guild thing.
It might be. Yeah, I'd be curious if you're a producer or you're in the film biz and you have the answer to that question. Let us know. cinemashocknet@gmail.com. Because I honestly don't know. I'd be very curious myself. I've always assumed it was probably a contractual thing, but I honestly don't know the answer for sure. So by this time, Fincher had completed Alien 3. By the time Jonathan Mostow dropped out and it had moved to Polygram, this is a couple of years down the line, Alien 3's done. And although Fincher was not particularly excited about the prospect of another feature film quite yet, scripts were still being sent his way. So naturally, when Steve Golan began considering possible directors for the game, his propaganda films cohort came to mind. So Fincher read the script. He saw a lot of potential in it, but he did feel that it needed some work. So he recruited Andrew Kevin Walker, who had scripted Seven, of course, to do a few revisions on the script.
Yeah, we talked a lot about Andrew Kevin Walker in the last episode. If you haven't done that already, go check that out because there's a lot of stuff about their bro-love relationship that developed in the making of that film. So this is where it continues to flourish and blossom.
So you see, the game and Seven were in development at roughly the same time. And when the project was first brought to him, Fincher had actually planned on shooting the game first. But when Brad Pitt became available to do Seven with a limited time frame of availability, which we also discussed a lot in that last episode, that project became the number one priority. They're like, we got Brad Pitt, we got to do this one right now. So they're like, let's do Seven first. So that temporarily pushed the game to the wayside. And of course, that turned out to be a blessing in disguise for a variety of reasons. The first and foremost being that Seven's success boosted Fincher's profile, and it helped him to secure a bigger budget for the game, a bigger budget than he may have gotten for it otherwise. If he had done this directly after Alien 3, it probably would have been a much smaller film. And also the success of Seven helped to attract bigger names, which in turn helped fast track the film into production.
This is kind of like the definition of like having multiple irons in the fire. Like,
yeah.
And when it's right to get one started is when you get one started. It might not be the one that you're super jazzed up about at the time, but you take what you can get if you're working in the arts.
Sure. And sometimes we talked a lot in that Seven episode about all these different pieces falling into place just perfectly for that movie to get made the way it got made.
Right.
And I think this is kind of an extension of that, because if the game had been made next, Fincher's career could have had a completely different trajectory than if he had made this instead of Seven right after Alien 3. So another stroke of luck here, or at least very good timing, was that by the time Fincher circled back to the game after Seven was done, Brancato and Ferris, the writers, had become certified hit makers thanks to the success of their script for The Net, which is a cyber thriller starring Sandra Bullock that they'd written, which had been released in 1995. And that movie brought in over $110 million at the global box office, giving possible financiers even more reason to want to get another Brancato Ferris script into production. I'm sure The Net has aged very well. I have not seen it since about 1995 or 6, but I'm sure it plays really well in 2024.
Have people started regularly ordering pizza from their home computers? Is that a thing yet?
It's innovative. And probably most importantly, because he had already worked on Seven before coming back to the game, Fincher had also developed a great working relationship with Andrew Kevin Walker, and he knew that Walker's cynical touch was exactly what the game's script needed.
You know what? Actually, I don't know where else to put this, so let me just say this too, because I didn't even have this down to talk about, but it's worth us mentioning. What is his wife's name? Sean Chafin, I think that's her name. It's spelled like Cean.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure how to pronounce it, but yeah, Fincher's wife you're talking about.
Yeah, and I promise I'll work harder as we go along here, but she works predominantly with Fincher throughout his career. But they got married like right before all this, I believe, is about the time that they got married. He was married previously to, I believe it was a photographer. I think it's the same woman that Gary Oldman was married to, as a matter of fact, or is married to. I don't even know if they're still together. Whatever. Point is, Sean Chafin, producer, she started in about 1991 or two with propaganda films. And she worked as PA, second AD, all of this stuff, tried to become a producer. And she wants to get into line producing. She says, basically, if you look at interviews with her, somebody dared me to work with Fincher. She said she chose propaganda because she always learned more with those people. She said she got a dare, go work for David Fincher. He was younger than her. And she was like, that little punk? Sure. And so They thought it would be a challenge, and she said she learned the most she ever had about filmmaking working with David. They ended up developing a relationship, fell in love, they got married. All this happened right before this, and I say all that to say she ends up working with him a lot. She tried to get her first producing job working on Seven, and the studio just would not have it. That she had no experience prior to that, and it was not going down. She does get involved with the game because of all of this, and she becomes a producer on it. And the best advice she tried to give David Fincher was, don't do this movie. She tried to tell him not to do it. He consults with her a lot, and she was like, I don't feel like this is going to turn out the way you want it to. You should not do this one. Wow. And Fincher listened, obviously.
Yeah, he did not, and we'll get into it later, but Fincher was not the biggest. He's a little hard on this film, I think, on the final product. And he does say, I have read in interviews where he's like, yeah, I should have listened to her.
I figure we'd give her the credit early on to let people know that she did try to stop him ahead of time. So when he gets all pissy later, then,
Yeah. So Fincher and Walker, who, by the way, remains uncredited on the film. You won't see his name anywhere in the credits on this. He was a script doctor, essentially, which he does a lot. So Fincher and Walker, they began to revise the screenplay, working on about 5 additional drafts. And while he loved the concept of the script, and he loved all the twists and turns that the story took, there was something about the way the main character was written that just didn't quite work for him. See, in the original script, Nicholas Van Orton, which, by the way, fantastic name for this kind of character, right? Nicholas Van Orton, perfect. Yeah. But he was written as a much more sympathetic character. But by the time Fincher and Walker were done with him, he'd been transformed into an unlikable protagonist, a lonely investment banker that Fincher compares to Ebenezer Scrooge, a comparison that speaks not only to the cruelty of the character early on, but to the transformation that he goes through over the course of the story. Or, as Fincher so eloquently put it, the game had become a story, quote, about a guy who's a fucking asshole who gets his shit reoriented. He's got a way with words, doesn't he?
He certainly does. He certainly does. I'm a big fan of Christmas Carol. Of course, It's a Wonderful Life. Those two practically go hand in hand. I had never considered this to be sort of another allegory for Ebenezer Scrooge, for that character. And like hearing that kind of makes me want to go watch this again with that in mind. Because you do see him kind of take that journey, not only like through his past, but like stuff that's happening in his business at the moment. And then of course the future kind of rushes up to meet him, much like the glass of the ballroom, but like by him shooting, well, we're in spoiler territory, it's fine. When he shoots his brother, it's just kind of like, oh, well, that's it. Not only have I ended my brother's life, but my life is now over emotionally and quite literally, as I'll be arrested and go to prison and all of these things. And it's not until he crashes through. And to be honest, even a few minutes after he's crashed through the glass, that it's like, wait, I'm here.
Yeah.
You there, boy, go and buy the biggest turkey. Like,
yeah, it's not like a 1-to-1, analogy between the two,
right?
But once you have that little seed in your head of like, this is like Ebenezer Scrooge, like it becomes pretty obvious, because you've got this guy who he's rich as hell, but he's also kind of a dick to everybody. He lives alone in this huge house all by himself. He doesn't have any family or anybody really around him, nobody that loves him necessarily, except for his brother, who could be kind of like Scrooge's nephew almost, in a way, in that like this is the only blood relation who gives a fuck about you, basically.
Yeah.
And then you could even say that, what's his name? Daniel Shore, the news guy who comes on the screen, is almost your Marley character. I was about to say Marley and Marley character because my brain initially goes to the Muppet Christmas Carol, but in the original story there, it's just Jacob Marley. So it's and then of course over the course of the film he has all of that stripped away. So it is pretty interesting, and I don't know that I had ever thought of it before this time either.
And I'll take one more second just to mention the episode of Star Trek: The Next Generation, Tapestry, which also kind of fits that whole framework. And it's weird to think of Picard as the Ebenezer Scrooge, but like watch Tapestry again, and that actually might be a fun back-to-back viewing, is Tapestry and the game. and see these guys go through this.
You talk about a movie like this, and you think of twists, and I think the biggest one so far is Todd figured out a way to get Star Trek into this.
Todd. You get one Star Trek reference per episode. You just used it. You just spent it.
Man,
damn it! That was your Star Trek coin for this episode.
That early script, like you said, they did some revisions there. I was trying to find like all the differences or everything in it, but I did see an interview with Fincher where he mentioned that the thing that locked him in with his interest that he said really caught his eye was that Christine's entire home is described as basically being set decorated.
Yeah.
And he said, that's what I said. I got to see this. I got to make this one.
That's cool. It's a cool concept.
The rooftop scene, I know, as scripted, featured like it was a different kind of version of that scene. Basically, Conrad sits up after he gets shot and Nicholas is about to jump off the roof and says like, no, you're making a mistake, but it's too late. And he's already falling and he was going to have like a moment of regret or something, to being like, oh shit, what I did. And then the landing on the pad would be like one last gift from CRS is how they described it. And I think it was some disagreement with some of the producers or the studio or something that just didn't let that happen. They said they fought for it as much as they could as writers, they said. Now, you mentioned, more likable. I think it was in that same interview with Film and Video magazine. He talks about like originally that character was supposed to be like younger, like 20s or 30s. And he was more of a Gordon Gekko kind of person. He was like a playboy, like a player kind of person. And so I guess more likable, but he was like, seemed like a frat douche who got super rich basically. But instead, Walker and Fincher kind of thought there was like something not connecting with the audience there that wouldn't connect with the audience. So they went more with Scrooge. He called him an emotional miser cut off from the world.
Well, I think it makes more sense for him to be a little bit older because he's kind of like, he's turning 48 in the film, and he's kind of like, I guess, being a little bit older and not being like a guy who's like, 25 years old. It makes more sense because he's looking at his mortality. Essentially, he's looking at his mortality in the face a little bit closer than a 25-year-old would.
I brought that up just because I feel like that difference alone could have drastically altered the perception of the movie or something. That and the totally different ending. But
that probably may have fit the Kyle MacLachlan casting because because the character as written obviously would not have worked for Kyle MacLachlan because Kyle MacLachlan was probably 30 years old at the time. So he was a little bit younger. So that was probably where that casting came from, is that version of the character, because you certainly can't see him in this role the way it's written in the final film. Absolutely not. So while Fincher and Walker, they seem to kind of crack the code of that lead character. They tweaked the film's tone a little bit with some of these rewrites, but Fincher still struggled with the film's ending. Because as originally written, the film ends with Nicholas actually killing Christine, and then he's plagued by the guilt of this act and commits suicide. He kills himself that's how it ends. But Fincher didn't think that this made a whole lot of sense from a character standpoint, saying there's not a big enough emotional hook here for what has to happen. I didn't see why killing this woman who's lied to you at every turn would make you commit suicide. So to him that just, why would the character do that other than it to be a shocking ending?
That's true.
And he's right. And Fincher continued to struggle with the ending all the way up to filming. And if later interviews with him are to be believed, he never really felt like he quite cracked it. I quoted this interview in our last episode as well, but there's a really great interview with Fincher from Playboy in 2014. And in that, he's quoted saying, "We didn't figure out the third act, and it was my fault because I thought if you could just keep your foot on the throttle, it would be liberating and funny." So his idea is like, let's just keep going and it's not going to matter. We're just going to get to the ending and it's going to be entertaining regardless. It might be a little bit early in the episode to be asking questions, but since we're already talking about the ending and considering the Fincher quote that I just read, I have to ask you guys, what do y'all think of the film's ending? For you, does it work for you? Does it sufficiently explain, what's been happening to Nicholas? Is it an earned ending? Like, how do you guys think about the ending?
I think with how, him shooting his brother, walking up and jumping, and again, maybe because I'm still kind of hooked on the Christmas Carol comparison, it seemed like everybody in Ebenezer Scrooge's life were good people, like trying to be good especially to Ebenezer, and he had just rejected all of that So when we see Conrad, who's kind of giving a middle finger to the world, and the two of them scream at each other on the streets of San Francisco, there's not really a big connection. You don't really feel sympathy for either of these guys. It's more of a shock to the system, if anything, that when he lands, and then you as the audience are kind of stumbling around like Nicholas off of the big inflatable pad thing, and you feel very much like him until Conrad walks up with the t-shirt, which the t-shirt is hilarious, but he walks up with the t-shirt and you're just like, wait, what? And so I don't know that we get the satisfying ending in that moment, but then there's the final shot of the film where she's, do you want to get coffee with me at the airport? And then he looks around at the empty street and we're left to wonder, is the game still running?
Yeah.
So I guess I feel like, in light of the shooting Conrad, falling off of the roof reveal of the birthday party is more of a shocker. But the real thing is that the film kind of begs the question of, did the game actually end? Is it over? Is it still running? If it is, what happens next? And so I feel like the game could actually be part one of a trilogy. Like, if it was made today, it would be part one of a trilogy. And we would continue on with Nicholas Van Orton trying to get his life back,
bringing
basically
down CRS.
Yeah, exactly.
Turning into a fucking action John Wick or something. What do you think, Gary?
All I can tell you is, from the time that I saw it initially, I thought it was beautiful. I thought it was a perfectly executed movie. So I have always loved the game, and I think that the ending is fine. I literally have no problem with the ending. I don't even think until I started researching it for this that I realized that Fincher even had a problem with it, because I was like, what did he mess up? I guess some of his thoughts, but I thought the game plays really, really well, and it gets to that point and it makes sense. And he's trying to, it's almost like in his head, he's trying to figure out what leads someone to kill themselves, and then also to try to understand that, and then finally gets to that point also to have that whole Ebenezer Scrooge moment for his life. I will say, if you get to the point you're suicidal and then somebody pulls the rug out from it under you when you finally pull the trigger, so to speak, that is it's got to be irritating.
I mean, I love the ending. I think it works really well. Now, if you try to break it apart, this is the case for the whole movie, and I'll talk more about this later probably, but if you try to nitpick this movie, from a logical, real world standpoint, it doesn't make a lot of sense.
Right, exactly.
But the thing is that this movie does not operate within the logic of the real world. It operates within the logic of its own world. It runs on movie logic, and that's all it needs to run on, because it's a movie. The game is a tale of redemption, right? Call him Ebenezer Scrooge or call him George Bailey. The game is about a man who learns to appreciate the life that he's been given. And although it's people and not ghosts or angels who bring him to this point of realization, that doesn't mean that the film doesn't earn its fantasy ending, I think. I mean, if you want to talk logic, the entire film falls apart, because this is a film that, like I said, it doesn't run a real world logic, but it is committed to its own sort of absurd logic, and you as an audience member have to be on board with that, because nothing that happens to Nicholas throughout the whole film could possibly happen in the real world. But again, this is not the real world. It's a movie world where anything is possible and anything can be explained away. And I think that's why it works. But you as an audience member do have to be on board for that, because otherwise you start thinking about all the different moving parts that would have to exist for all of these people to be in on the game and to be able to manipulate him to this certain point in time at the end. And that's fucking ludicrous.
You have to make a huge assumption that they've got backup plans and counter options and everything for any possible decision that Nicholas is going to make throughout this whole thing. Also, he ends up in a few spots where insurance would not cover that,
right? When he's in the car, when the cab crashes into the water.
That's exactly the one I was thinking of just then.
How did they know he was going to be able to get out of there? They could have just murdered that guy, but you have to just go with the flow that okay, maybe they had divers under there who were watching just in case. I don't know, but you just have to accept the fact that there's some ridiculous shit happening in this movie, and either you're on board with it and you like the way that they're piecing together the puzzle, so to speak. Either you're on board with that or you're not, because that's the main, I guess, flaw that I've seen people point out of the film is that, oh, it doesn't make any sense. Like, this couldn't really happen. Well, who cares? Batman couldn't really happen. And nobody, like, who gives a shit? It's a movie. Like, it doesn't need to be realistic. That's not the kind of movie we're trying to make. We want it to be emotionally real by the end, because there is an emotional payoff to the end of this movie that needs to work. And I think it does.
I've seen Fincher.
You sound like you were a little more on the fence about the emotional payoff, but I think it works. It works for me. I mean, I get the criticisms.
Let me just add on to what I've said. Like, I saw the game years ago. Maybe I'm putting the cart before the horse here. This might be part of our discussion towards the end, but I did see the game years and years and years ago. And it wasn't until I started really diving in with the this is the first Criterion I've ever purchased.
Wow.
Yeah. And it wasn't until I sat down and started, going through the notes and looking at the research and everything was just kind of like, it was really causing me to look at this a little bit deeper. And that's when some of these things started coming to the surface for me.
Right.
I mean, it's not a secret. Like, I'm the fresh take guy. And when I did see this years ago, I kind of just let the movie sort of wash over me and just kind of get lost in that world and experience it. And when the credits roll, oh man, that was great. But, as we do, deep diving on this stuff, it does pull the curtain back a little bit, and you kind of get a look at the gears, and, you feel differently once you've seen how the sausage is made. But yeah, I still love it. But yeah, it does cause me to sort of take a second look at some things and really figure out, like, well, how do I actually feel about this?
Right.
I've seen interviews with Fincher where he talks about too, like, kind of lamenting on the fact that audiences, he hates that audiences want everything in like a 2-minute trailer, basically, is what he says. And
right.
But he's like, with a movie, you're supposed to give yourself over to the movie, and he thinks it's harder than ever for audiences to just do that. And that's probably what he's thinking here too, is you just have to let yourself be absorbed into that world and just accept it.
I mean, I've said that multiple times on this podcast. Like, I think a lot of people watch movies the wrong way. I think you need to meet a movie where it's at. You can't hold every movie to the same standard. Not every movie is trying to be the same kind of movie. And you have to, like, and some movies operate on a very different level as far as like what is considered logical and stuff within the world of that movie. I mean, I already name dropped John Wick, but think of that. Think of how ridiculous everything that happens in the world of John Wick is, like, with the Continental and this like underworld of assassins, like the hobos in the subway are all actually secret assassins. Like, it's stupid if you think of it, but it works within the logic of the movie. And that's where, like, you have to meet the movie. You have to meet it in the middle, and say, like, hey, I'm going to meet you here, and now it's up to you to satisfy me.
Suspension of disbelief.
Exactly.
Definitely has to come into play.
Speaking on the ending, just one other thing too is, like, do you think Fincher was almost in danger here of becoming the next M. Night or something? Like, where everybody's expecting the twist.
I think after Fight Club, he's in danger of that.
Oh yeah, that's a good point. Yeah,
I think after Fight Club, he is definitely in danger of being the ending guy after 3 in a row. Although I will say the ending of this one, one thing I thought of this time watching it are the parallels to the end of Alien 3 with Sigourney Weaver. Her fall at the end, where she's sacrificing herself for the greater good of humanity, but as opposed to Nicholas. But
even Wayland is portraying like, hey, we're actually here to help you. Like, he's putting on this facade of like, just trust us. Everything's going to be fine, much like CRS. And
that's what I love about watching like a director's movies all in a row, like we do on here. So you start to see these parallels that if I had watched Alien 3 like a year ago and then watched the game, I probably wouldn't have thought of that. But watching them back to back like this, you're like, wait a second, this fucking guy.
Yeah, there was a thing on the commentary, I think is where I saw it, but I would have never noticed. But they, when a computer boots up in this movie, and I can't remember where they pointed it out, but it's the exact same sound from Alien 3. Like, they used the sound effect from like a computer booting up on Alien.
All right, so while Fincher and Walker were doing all of these rewrites. During this whole process, the project began to attract attention from some pretty big name actors, many of whom had seen Seven, and they're like, I want to work with this guy. I want to work with David Fincher. This guy clearly has the goods. And the first one of these was Jodie Foster. Now, the obvious role for Jodie Foster in this movie would be Christine, right? The waitress who ends up being an employee of CRS. But Fincher kind of felt that it would be distracting to put a two-time Oscar winner in what is essentially a secondary role. Having her in the role, I think, would clue the audience in pretty early on that Christine is a big part of the story. Like if, because you can actually see her in the background of some scenes before she ever even has an interaction with Nicholas. And if that were Jodie Foster, you'd be like, that's Jodie Foster. Clearly, she is not just going to be a waitress in this one scene, So that's the way that it is in the final film. It's not immediately apparent that Christine is a part of the bigger story. But if you cast a name like Jodie Foster, then, and this is 6 years after Silence of the Lambs. So her profile is pretty big. This came out the year after Nell, I think, which was also a big hit for her.
Oh man.
So anyway,
she'd only spoken like Nell too in
throughout
this. Yeah. Oh wait, Checkabee.
Pays in a win.
So Foster,
hey, in a win.
I don't know if we're allowed to do Nell impressions anymore, are we? I don't.
She was not handicapped.
No,
she had just learned a different language.
Her own
Pays
language.
in a win, Nicholas.
I wonder how that movie
Nicholas
holds
Van
up. When's the last
Olten.
time you? When's the last time you watched Nell?
It's
like
been a long time.
1997, probably.
Yeah.
Right, I think so.
Yeah. So Foster made the suggestion that they rewrite the Conrad character to be Nicholas's daughter. Conrad's Nicholas's brother, Connie. You don't even have to change the name; just call her Connie. So Conrad, who gifts Nicholas's entry in the game, wasn't actually a blood relative in the original script, though. The Brancato Ferris first draft that got this whole thing rolling. Instead, he was one of Nicholas's old college buddies, and changing the character to be one of Nicholas's family members would bring some additional emotional heft to their relationship. But by this time in the film's development, the lead role of Nicholas had already been cast. I don't have any good stories about how this happened. It's just one of those things. He probably got sent a script, but the actor cast in the role was, of course, Michael Douglas. And Michael Douglas didn't like the notion of Nicholas's daughter being the one to bring him into the game. So he made the suggestion that the character be rewritten so that she's Nicholas's sister, despite the fact that Jodie Foster is like 2 decades younger than Michael Douglas. So that's a pretty big age gap for a brother and sister. But in the end, things didn't work out for a variety of reasons. But the main reason that's usually given is a pretty simple one. Scheduling conflicts. Foster was signed on to do Contact for Robert Zemeckis, and as the development for the game kind of dragged on, she suddenly became unavailable since the predicted shooting schedule for Fincher's film conflicted with the planned shooting dates for Contact. So she couldn't do. She was already signed on to Contact, so she wasn't going to be able to do the game.
And Fincher said, "I'll get you next time, Jodie. Next time."
Or the time after. It'll be
the time after. Yeah. For what it's worth, Michael Douglas did play Jodie Foster's guardian in the 1972 Disney film Napoleon and Samantha.
Right, where she's like 9 years old and he's like 30 years old.
Yeah. So I'm just saying they've done it before.
They have worked. Yeah.
Do it again. Also, I love that you, like David Fincher, who every time he's asked about this situation skirts around the details and makes it sound way more clean than it was. He was covering his ass and avoiding the question. But Foster, they say scheduling conflicts, but she was holding out for this role and eventually was dropped from it and ended up suing the shit out of Polygram from anywhere from like 15 million to 50 million, depending on where you're looking at it.
Really?
Threatened to pull her production company, Egg Pictures, who worked with Polygram, also pull them away from us, sued them. They ended up settling out of court on this. But
wow.
she was suing basically for saying that the time she spent,
they wasted her time.
It wasted her time.
Yeah.
And she turned down other roles because she was waiting on this to get rolling, and they fucked her out of a role, basically.
Well, I mean, she got paid, so I guess good for you.
Yeah.
And obviously that didn't sour her relationship with Fincher, although I do think we'll get to it when we get to Panic Room, but I do think that her and Fincher clashed on set, but I think that was more due to his directing style than anything else. So after Foster left, the decision was made to turn Connie back into a male character, written this time as his brother, which I think works much better than a sister. And maybe that's because I only have brothers and no sisters. But I always feel that there's more of a competitive nature to a relationship between brothers and that isn't there between a brother and a sister necessarily. And Fincher actually, in an interview with Rolling Stone, when they did a set visit on the game, he kind of made a point about this. He says, this is a quote from him: "As brothers, they naturally carry all this stuff into every scene, respect or disrespect. Then you ask, does Conrad fuck him over to save him?" So there's more of this kind of like combative nature that works, I think, better because you don't know if Conrad's really trying to help him or not for a lot of the movie. The Conrad role was originally offered to Jeff Bridges, who declined. I'm not sure why, but he declined, and it eventually, of course, went to Sean Penn. Now, I tried to come up with a joke about Sean Penn and Fincher being Eskimo brothers because Sean Penn was married to Madonna, right? But I just couldn't. I just couldn't think of a good joke there. But there's something there.
Did they rub noses and say "Ugga Mugga"? Isn't that an Eskimo kiss? Yeah.
Eskimo Brothers is from The League. You've seen The League.
Yeah, I know that, but I was thinking Eskimo, and they rub their noses.
I don't think they say.
They're
I don't
like
think you can say that they say "Ugga Mugga" though. That sounds offensive.
It sounds offensive, but it's on Daniel Tiger right now. There's a whole song about "Ugga Mugga means I love you," and it was from Mr. Rogers. So
really, well, never mind.
Really?
Yeah,
Mr. Rogers would never say anything wrong.
Google it. Ugga Mugga's a thing.
I believe you, and I won't Google it.
My mom did that when I was a little
Rogers
kid.
Was a raging racist. So let's just
we will not disparage the name of Mr. Rogers on this podcast.
This feels like a good way to get heat, Todd.
You can talk shit. You can talk shit about anyone else on the planet, but Mr. Rogers.
Yeah, talk shit about Michael Douglas.
Yeah, fuck that guy. No, actually, we are going to talk about Michael Douglas. Okay, so there's a lot of great casting in this movie, and we'll get to more of it in a second. But I did just want to take a second here to talk about Michael Douglas because I think that he is like the perfect choice for this role. In fact, in doing my research on this episode, and maybe you saw something that I didn't, Gary, I don't know, but I never saw anyone else's name even brought up in consideration for the role of Nicholas. I mean, it's almost like he was the only choice for this role.
Yeah, I don't think I ever saw anything either, even like anything really about like how'd you get it or blah blah blah. Yeah. It was just more like they set up the script and he's there. I don't know.
Yeah, it feels like it was made for him because at this point in his career, Douglas had kind of perfected the smug rich asshole character. In 1987 alone, he played this type of character in Wall Street and Fatal Attraction, and then he spent the next decade playing variations on those roles in films like War of the Roses, Basic Instinct, and Disclosure. So like he's that guy like on screen. So by casting Douglas here, I think that Fincher, of course, is very aware of Douglas's well-established on-screen persona, and he's playing into it. He knows that the audience is very aware of the type of characters that Michael Douglas normally plays. So that only, I think, makes it more effective when over the course of the film, that slickness and that narcissism is chipped away little by little as the things that Nicholas takes for granted, like money and power, begin to be taken away from him. The character's transformation, I think, would not have been as powerful in any other actor's hands. So, I mean, what do you guys think? How do you think Douglas works in the role here?
I personally really like Douglas in this role. I think this is my favorite role for Michael Douglas, I think, personally, just because exactly all those things you just said about him. I feel like he's built exactly for this role. And then there's something that happens to him in this one that I think very rarely happens for him to me. And he becomes like more likable as it goes along, which is the idea with the movie, because he always just seems like an asshole boss corporate guy. I've never been like a huge Michael Douglas person. So for me, Michael Douglas, it's this role or it's Disclosure from 1994 with Demi Moore. I will go to bat for that movie all day. Because
is it because of Michael Douglas or is it because of Demi Moore?
It's more, well, it's Demi Moore, and it's also because that movie is about where like they're exes and he's remarried, and then she becomes his boss and then tries to get him to have sex with her. And when he starts to give in, but then he turns her down, and then she accuses him of rape. And it's a whole plot line that would not work today.
From the writer of Jurassic Park. So 'cause it's based on it's based on a Michael Crichton book, believe it or not.
It would definitely get a lot of shit today, but it's worth watching just because of that movie is like one of those sleazy 90s movies that, you know, there were shit tons of. And so that's not surprising. The fun part
and Douglas
is,
did a lot of those. I mean, Fatal Attraction and Basic Instinct also fall into that sleazy 90s movie. I mean, Fatal Attraction was 80s technically, but close.
but none of them have a final battle inside of VR of the shittiest computer game ever.
that is true.
Why does that happen? I don't know. They work
Because
for
it was a Michael
software
Crichton
company,
book.
kinda,
That's why.
and it is just the weirdest fucking turn that this movie takes.
Yeah, it's a Disclosure's a fun movie. That's something we'll have to throw on the roulette wheel one day, maybe, and see if it comes along. That and like Rising Sun, those were the two like weird Michael Crichton movies from the late 90s. I don't know what my favorite Michael Douglas role would be, but because I like him. But I rewatched Falling Down for the first time in years, not too long ago, and that movie is fantastic, and he's really good in it. And he is a different type of asshole in that one. He's not rich. He's probably part of the plot of the film is that he's on hard times, but that's a fun movie, Falling Down. If we ever do a Joel Schumacher series, we will 100% be talking about that movie.
I don't know that I had any real big thoughts about Michael Douglas. I mean, I know he's a star, but I kind of look at him like one of those character actors who's
that's what he's become.
Yeah, that's what he's become.
Yeah.
And so, you know, trying to dig a little bit deeper, you know, it's like, okay, well, he's having his life torn to shambles and, you know, potentially losing money, potentially losing deals, losing his sanity. And there was a thought of like, should he have, because he strikes me as a guy, Nicholas Van Orton strikes me as a guy who's definitely in control of the situation. Like, no matter where he is, no matter what he's doing, he's the guy with his hands on the wheel. And this kind of shows you someone who has that stripped away from him and how would they react. And based on like the high stress of his job, there's a part of me that would have liked to seen him a little more manic. Like he gets a little manic, but manic as manic as an investment banker would. But in a sense that like he kind of gets frustrated with all the photos on the desk and he pulls the gun on the guy and
I think that's pretty fucking
like,
manic.
I don't know. It's like, I mean, a part of me thought like, well, when you've got Conrad, who is his own kind of bag of cats, like, you know, do you slip into that or do you try to still?
But Conrad's playing a part though, because Conrad's part of the game,
right? So I don't know. I see both sides. Like I do love Michael Douglas as this character, but I also like am trying to think of how else could he have swung bigger, swung harder. Like, I don't know if that changes the narrative or anything, but I don't know. It's interesting choices all around. When he's walking through the house that has already been graffitied and everything, you see him walking. I would have liked, because I've seen people hold guns like for real and they're always shaking, and he didn't have much of a shake to his hand. And I was like, somebody in his position would have been shaking a little bit more. And I don't know if that was just kind of overlooked, or maybe that's not part of the thing, or is he in that much control that he's able to subdue like the nervous shaking or
I
something.
I think you're nitpicking a little bit and just looking for something.
Well, yeah, that's what we're
I was going to say that felt nitpicky to me.
That's a little nitpicky there, Todd.
I don't know. That's what I bring.
I also think now's the perfect time to mention that in like 2013, Michael Douglas claimed that he got throat cancer from going down on Catherine Zeta-Jones. And
when is not the perfect time to bring that up, honestly?
I only bring it up this time because I teased it last time, and I think I even mentioned it in like Basic Instinct or something. But
every time we do a Michael Douglas movie, you're going to bring it up.
Yeah. Yep. But this time I actually did a little more research into that. And
did you?
Did you do more research into Catherine Zeta-Jones's pussy?
Yeah.
I found that there has been a rise in cancers that seemingly are caused from HPV sent over through oral sex. So he's not full of shit. Like, he found it on the back of his tongue, and that actually was a thing before anybody thought that was something that could happen, and it can happen. So be careful out there. And
The more
so
you
I'd like to publicly
know.
apologize to Michael Douglas for, I don't know. It's still a fucked up, weird story to tell a journalist.
It is
but,
a weird thing to mention to a reporter, yes. But honestly,
but he's not full of shit.
He was bragging. That's a little bit of a brag. Let's be honest.
You're right.
I mean, yeah. What? Oh, listen, I eat so much pussy.
No, let's move. All right, we're moving on.
That it gave me throat cancer. Like, what?
I love that this comes right after the discussion about a song from Daniel Tiger.
We are nothing if not diverse here at Cinema Shock.
Well, there's a lot of different paths there. It's diverse. It's also about pussy, and then it just.
All right. So, with both of the Van Orton brothers cast, the other biggest role to fill is that of Christine, and that role ultimately went to a Canadian actress named Deborah Kara Unger.
Should we say that they were trying to fill Christine? Should we say that?
Nope.
No. Okay. All right.
We just flipped a switch on Todd.
We did.
Sorry.
Something happened.
Sorry, guys.
Gary, can you just mute Todd for the rest of the episode, please?
This is his Zoom.
Oh shit.
Yes, I'm in control now.
He's just gonna mute us, and it's just gonna turn into a fucking Dane Cook special for the next half an hour. All right. So while Michael Douglas and Sean Penn are probably well known to most of our listeners and need no introduction, I would imagine that more folks are unfamiliar with Deborah Unger. Although she was born in British Columbia, her screen career actually began in Australia after she graduated from Australia's National Institute of Dramatic Arts, the first Canadian to ever have that honor. In Australia, she worked steadily in film and television, but she returned to North America in the early 90s. And in 1993, she appeared in David Lynch's HBO miniseries Hotel Room. And then a year later appeared opposite Christopher Lambert, coming up for the second time in this series, in Highlander 3.
I was going to mention that it just gives us another opportunity to randomly mention Highlander and Christopher Lambert in a David Fincher series.
Right. Yep. So her breakthrough role came in 1996 when she starred in David Cronenberg's Crash. She had apparently auditioned for the role in the game by sending Fincher a test reel consisting of a 2-minute sex scene from that film. And as Douglas recalled to Entertainment Weekly, he, quote, thought it was a joke, but then we saw her in person and thought she was just great.
I think I was trying to figure that out. And Fincher, I think they even bring that up in the commentary too, which is just it seems like a weird thing to do, but I feel like
it worked for Jamie Lee Curtis.
Did it?
She shows up to James Cameron's office and is like, "What if I strip off all my clothes like this?"
Oh yeah, but she was already
like, all right.
But also maybe she is thinking the reel that I want to send over is where I worked with a legit director.
Yeah, and a film that won the jury prize at the Cannes Film Festival. So it wasn't. So it was a big deal. It was a big break for her. And I actually watched Crash this week for the first time in a long time. I've been on kind of a Cronenberg kick anyway, so I was like, well, shit, I'll just watch this since I know we're going to bring it up, and I haven't seen it in a few years. And there are quite a few sex scenes with her in that film, most of which would not really work as a test reel. There's one where there's one where it's her. So James Spader plays her husband. Have you guys seen Crash?
It's been forever. But...
Okay. So James Spader plays her husband in it, and there's one scene where they're getting it on, and they're having a conversation during it because they have an open relationship, and she's asking about his other experiences. She asks him if he's ever tasted cum while they're having sex, which is a very strange thing to ask your husband. But I can only imagine that that's the scene that she sent because it is a sex scene, but it is very dialogue heavy. And she is actually very good in Crash. Like, she's fantastic. She doesn't get as much credit for that film, I think, as like James Spader and Holly Hunter do, because they're more the leads, but she is really kind of the third lead. And she's very good in it. So I could definitely see how her role in that could help her get this role,
I feel like I tossed some shade to the other directors she's worked with, and I didn't mean to, but I just mean Cronenberg's a big name director. So
Yeah, I mean that's a big deal. If you worked with David Cronenberg, that's a big deal. Yeah, exactly. So another key role in the film, the character of actor turned CRS employee Jim Feingold, was played by veteran character actor James Rebhorn, who I love this guy. I love the way he plays this character because he plays it so nonchalant when he's in that interview scene. Because if he had played it like more sinister, it wouldn't have worked. Because Michael Douglas would have been clued in that something weird was going on, but he plays it so like dorky almost that it makes it work really well, I think.
Him handing him the Chinese takeout.
Oh,
Here,
yeah. And the look on Michael Douglas's face, like the idea of him having to hold somebody else's takeout, he looks so disgusted by it. It's a really great interaction.
Oh, yeah.
And then other key roles were filled by Peter Donat, Mark Boone Jr. making yet another appearance on the podcast, as well as Mark Boone Jr. Sons of Anarchy co-star Tommy Flanagan, who plays the taxi driver in this.
Yep.
Director Spike Jonze, who is another propaganda films guy. He has a little cameo at the end of the film as an EMT, and then journalist David Shore appears as himself in an early key scene.
Tommy Flanagan, by the way, just love that guy. And I just watched Braveheart last night.
Yeah.
And that guy is one of the main guys there. He has that you'd remember him always just from that scar on his face.
Thick Irish accent and a big scar on his face. Yeah, he's hard to miss.
I think they call it like the Gaelic smile or something like that. I feel like I read one time. That's like a legit thing. But anyway.
Yeah, and also Nicholas Van Orton's secretary, played by Elizabeth Dennehy, who also appeared on Star Trek.
How about that?
I got two, baby.
You were only allowed one, so now when we talk about Fight Club, you don't get to mention Star Trek at all.
Damn it! Spend them all here.
And you've had her on the podcast.
Oh yeah,
you should plug that. You have had her as a guest on your show. I actually didn't realize that was her as the secretary though. So good pull.
Yeah.
One of my favorite bits of casting trivia here involves the actor who plays Nicholas's father in the film in those like 16mm flashback scenes, which watching this movie this time, by the way, after having recently watched the entirety of Succession on HBO, like the opening credits to Succession are 100% ripping off the game because it's the exact same style. It is that 16mm film of all these characters when they were kids. Like that's exactly what they're doing, which, or let's say it's an homage to the game. But anyway, although we only get fuzzy glimpses of him, the actor who played the father character was a guy named Charles Martinet. And I bring him up not because I think I say that name and a bunch of you are going to like recognize it, but you will know his voice. So in addition to many other voice acting roles, because he is primarily a voice actor, Martinet has been the voice of both Mario and Luigi in the Super Mario Brothers video game since 1994. Although he did announce his retirement from the role of Mario last year. But Mario, I think the first big thing that most people would have heard him in was Mario 64. That's when he resumed the role of Mario, which I thought was just kind of cool, kind of fun, kind of weird, kind of mostly weird.
I just found myself laying naked on the beach on Yoshi's Island, and all of a sudden it clicked. October 12th, Mario's birthday. It's October 11th, you plumber. Whatever. This is for you. What do you get, the man who has everything? Consumer Recreation Services. Well, I do have fireballs. Here, blow this whistle. Why? To make your one-up fun. Fun? You know. Woohoo! You've seen other people have it.
Wow. Available for parties, bar mitzvahs.
It just kept going. I was pretty.
That was Mario and Luigi you were doing.
Yeah.
Mario, and Luigi Mario.
Yeah, exactly. I used to buy a crystal meth from the Goomba at the door.
But he's retired, and why would you not? Because then they had like this whole Mario movie last year, and you're probably, I think, you're waiting your whole career that this is it. This is the moment, and then. It's not me.
That they hire Star-Lord to they took your job. So he's just like, fuck it, I'm out. I'm done. So in discussing his approach to casting the game, the way Fincher explained it was, quote, I said to myself, look, this isn't about how it looks. It's about whether or not you believe these people are lying to you. So cast the best people you can and present it as simply as possible. it was a matter of creating a stage for these characters to simply tell you their stories. And then my job was to go, okay, I believe that take. And I kind of love that approach. Fincher is very self-depreciating. He doesn't give himself as much credit, I think, as he should sometimes. But by saying stuff like that, but you are the guy casting the role. But casting is obviously a huge part of any film's success. But I think this will also, we'll talk about some of his other collaborators in a minute, but I think his way of approaching that can be applied to all of his collaborators, whether it be costume designers or set designers or anyone. Like he just knows how to pick the best people for the role, whether it's in front of the camera or behind the camera. And honestly, that's something that a great director should be good at, because he's kind of like the conductor and they're his musicians, and he's running the show, but you got to have good musicians in the band. Right.
That's true.
That's very true.
Also nailed it with the timing of Michael Douglas too, because I think I forgot to mention this, but he had been married to the same woman at that time. This was before the whole Catherine Zeta-Jones cunnilingus thing. He had been married. He had been married to Deandra Luker for like 22 years, and was divorcing her right at this exact moment, was going through like divorce proceedings with her.
And I think their divorce went on for I think it wasn't finalized till like 2000. So it was pretty nasty. It went on for years.
But some of that darkness he could pull from probably came from that whole deal.
Oh yeah, definitely. So the game was primarily filmed in San Francisco, although the studio certainly did their best to get Fincher to try to film it somewhere else. By Fincher's estimation, filming in San Francisco, as opposed to like Los Angeles, added about $3 million to the film's budget. So there was a lot of pressure from Polygram to move the shoot back to LA, or to take it somewhere else like Chicago, where filming would generally be less expensive. And they actually did scout Chicago, but it didn't really work for the script. There were no mansions in town. They were all on the outskirts and in the suburbs. And with too much travel to Nick's house, it didn't have the same, what Fincher called the same storybook quality that San Francisco had. As Fincher put it, it had the old money, but not the prettiness or the magic.
Suck it, ugly ass Chicago.
So they scouted Seattle too, but again, it just didn't really work for the script. It didn't have the financial district like San Francisco does, and something that's obviously a major element in the film.
Suck it, poor ass Seattle.
So the script was written for San Francisco, and the city itself plays a very specific role in it, so nowhere but San Francisco was quite right. Not to mention, San Francisco has a great history on film, especially mystery and detective stories. Dirty Harry, Bullet, Vertigo, The Maltese Falcon, even Basic Instinct, another Michael Douglas movie. San Francisco just felt right for this movie. It is, as Fincher described it, a detective town. It's an obsession town. So that's he's like, this has to be San Francisco.
Three out of the 5 Herbie movies, I think. Also,
oh yeah, 3 of them. Huh?
Yeah,
wow.
Yeah, San Francisco.
It's a great place. It's a great town for car chases. The Rock has one of the greatest car chases of all time.
Yes,
it's also a great town for drag queens.
Did it? Yeah. Well, yeah. Is it? I believe.
I don't know.
I don't know, but I believe.
I know that there are a bunch that I'm aware of that are there. I don't know.
All right.
Nice.
Well, shooting in San Francisco did present its own problems. The part of the city where they were filming, for instance, was a busy area, and it was hard to move around in. So for a lot of the exterior scenes, the production had to shoot on the weekends so they could have more control. So it was just too hard to shut down the streets, traffic, and things like that. A couple of other key locations, though, do factor into the film, including the Van Orton Mansion, which is actually located in Woodside, California, which is about 25 miles south of San Francisco, and was portrayed by the historic Filoli Mansion, which was also used as the Carrington Mansion in the TV show Dynasty, as well as the Stanhope Estate in the big screen adaptation of George of the Jungle, which was released the same year as the game. So that's where, what's her name? Leslie Mann, that's in that movie. That's like her, she's like the rich girl in that. Have you guys seen George of the Jungle? I don't know.
Yeah, similar plot to the game.
Yeah.
She's like she's the romantic interest, and she comes from this rich family, the Stanhopes, and that's their house, the Van Orton house. So.
George by meth from Maitre D.
So, yeah, I love that you just keep going to that line.
Yeah,
too.
yeah.
that's the line.
I think they only had 24 hours in that place, by the way, so they had to get a lot of shit done.
Oh wow,
while they were filming there. So that's that's it. That nails it down from Fincher's meticulous process.
Do you know if the interiors were filmed there as well, or was it just the exteriors?
I think it
'Cause
was.
I couldn't quite figure that out.
I wanted to say I read something about like the gate area was
Yeah.
filmed and
But driving out of the gate is a different area because that's right in the middle of the city. Because they want they want the mansion to look like it's right in the middle of like San Francisco, not 20 miles south. So like when you see the gates open and a car driving down the street, that's a different location. That's not actually at this mansion, but the when you're looking at the gates and looking at the house, that's the Filoli mansion. But I'm not sure
Yeah.
about the inside. I think the inside might have been a soundstage or something. I couldn't find that out. I tried to find it and couldn't find that for sure because they do that whole black light thing and all that shit.
Yeah, I was gonna say if they actually did that in the mansion, that is impressive.
Yeah. So I think that
24 hours. Jeez.
Yeah. I don't think so. I think it must have
Gosh.
just the exteriors. So the production also briefly filmed in the Mexican border town of Mexicali for the sequence where Nicholas wakes up in a coffin south of the border. And the cemetery that's used in that scene was built specifically for the film on the banks of the New River, which in a set visit chronicled in the April 1997 issue of Rolling Stone, which we've already quoted. They described this area, the writer Fred Schruers describes this area as a sump of mercury and chicken parts, which I think is on the brochure.
Yeah.
So earlier, when we were talking about Douglas's work on the film, I mentioned how his presence really helped to sell Nicholas's transformation in the film and how he's kind of broken down by the circumstances he finds himself in as part of CRS's game. The Mexico sequence is kind of, I think, is kind of the moment when we see him fully humbled. And seeing Douglas disheveled and bloodied and filthy, juxtaposed with the polished, put-together guy we see earlier in the film, really hammers the point home. I mean, he goes from being a guy who brags about $2,000 shoes to a guy who is scrounging for change. There's a really great essay written for Criterion. You guys, I don't know if you guys read it or not, but Gina Telleroli is the writer who wrote this essay for Criterion. If you have that release, you can read the full thing. It's worth checking out. But she breaks down how Fincher uses the visuals of the film to further pinpoint this transformation in Nicholas. No longer is Nicholas dressed in the dark, tailored suits that he normally wears. In fact, we don't ever see how he gets changed. We assume that the people at CRS just changed him out of his clothes and put him in these other clothes in Mexico. But when he wakes up, he's wearing a white, ill-fitting suit where, and it's too big for him. It's dirty. It's so big that like his hands are lost in the arms and at the bottom of the pants, they kind of bunch up around his feet. It's clearly it's not tailored for him like everything else that he wears. And as Telleroli writes, quote, he looks small, and in that smallness there is fear, which I think is a really great observation that she made. This is a man who's finally having to come to grips with his place in the world. As we see him fumble for money to catch a ride back to the U.S., awkwardly dropping change on the floor in that diner. We're reminded of his self-proclaimed job description earlier, where he says he moves money from one place to another. It's how he described it to Christine. So to the man who said that, money is, like it is to a lot of wealthy people, simply an idea. But it's that moment in the diner when he's desperate that money becomes a tangible thing for him. We see him earlier in the film where his maid makes him this meticulous meal. It's just a burger and fries, but like she takes it, she puts it in the oven. He takes the little fancy, I don't know what you call those things. I've never eaten anywhere fancy enough to where my food would be under one of those. But he takes the thing off and it's like perfectly constructed. Everything looks picture perfect. And then in Mexico, he's like just downing a street taco because that's all he can afford. So it's a very great juxtaposition. And I just love that the visual contrast of him earlier in the film versus him in this sequence. I think it really just brings home how far he's fallen.
Oh yeah. I mean, even because once he does get back to San Francisco, you see he has that sort of moment of elation in the shower of just like,
yeah.
Like you never had a shower so good as when you're just filthy from the road and a grave.
Yeah.
I was watching this and I was thinking, why is it always in Mexico? And it's because I've been on, you were talking about being on a kick. I've been on a Coen Brothers kick. And on No Country for Old Men, there's the scene where like Josh Brolin wakes up and he's like been shot in the side and like he's on the streets of Mexico and wakes up and he's like
Yeah.
all disheveled and the mariachi band's like playing over him, I think. And anyway, I don't know why I just thought of that, except it's just weird. I guess
It's very
down and
similar.
out Mexico
Yeah.
is the way to be. Mexicali is I think for Californians, like a lot of the high school kids go there to party because it's got a lot of clubs and stuff, and you only have to be 18 to drink in Mexico.
Yeah.
It's useless information, but I had it, so I'm giving
It's
it
not
to you
useless
free.
for anyone who's listening who may be a high schooler in California.
There you go.
The more you know. Since I mentioned Douglas's suit in that scene, I should probably mention the film's costume designer, which was Michael Kaplan, who we talked about in the last episode. He was the costume designer on Seven. He's a regular Fincher collaborator, but and he's going to do most of the films we're talking in this series, actually. But one thing we always talk about with Fincher is kind of his attention to detail. And this goes back to what I was talking about earlier. He knows exactly what he wants, and he's one of those great directors who knows exactly the right collaborators to bring in to help get his vision on screen. And in the case of The Game, a lot of the look of the film can be attributed to production designer Jeffrey Beecroft and cinematographer Harry Savides, both of whom were collaborators from Fincher's days working in commercials and music videos. Beecroft had worked on some Nike commercials and some Madonna videos for Fincher. They went way back, but by the time they were making The Game, he was already an Academy Award nominee, having received a nod for his work on Dances with Wolves. Harry Savides, he had a pretty extensive background as a director of photography on music videos, not only with Fincher, but also for Mark Romanek, who he worked with several times over the years, including on Romanek's video for Nine Inch Nails' Closer.
Here's a weird bit of trivia. In Empire magazine, Fincher says that Harris Savides, his nickname is Haggis. And in this movie, there is haggis in every scene somewhere.
Like the meal? Like the
dish?
Like
haggis. Yeah, it just says there's a can of haggis in every scene of this movie.
I love that.
And I don't, this is super weird. I don't know.
It's weird, but
have either of you guys eaten haggis?
I have not. I would eat it if I were in Scotland, but in no other circumstances would I find myself doing that. It just feels like it's like you go to Chicago, you got to get a Chicago deep dish. You got to get a Chicago dog.
Right.
Like a Chicago style hot dog does not appeal to me really at all. And what I would normally want on a hot dog. But if I'm in Chicago, I got to get the full experience, So if I go to Scotland, I will have haggis. If I go to Ireland, I will drink Guinness. If I go to England, I'll eat beans for breakfast, I guess.
Hey, you know what? That full English is something else. It's pretty tasty.
If you want to fart for the entire rest of the day.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Those Brits are full of farts. We have some Brits listening to the show. How farty are you? Let us know at cinema_shock on a daily basis. How many times do you fart?
If Michael Douglas was eating your butthole, would he get pink eye?
Oh, Jesus Christ, Todd.
That's
you really did
weird.
Unleash something in Todd.
Yeah, there's
Gary.
a switch
go.
flipped, and Todd is
there's no going
toxic.
back.
I don't know. Did you mention Michael Massey? Because I don't remember you saying him.
I don't think I mentioned Michael Massey. Who's that?
That's the guy that's he played Fun Boy and Crow. He's the guy who had the gun that when it went off, it killed Brandon Lee. And so I don't want to say he's the guy who killed Brandon Lee, but anyway.
He's the guy. Yeah, I did not know that. But is he?
He had a hard time with acting after that because of the whole and so I think he was taking like little bit things here and there, and this was one of them. But he's one of the paramedics in the
at the end
climax. Yeah.
Okay.
So anyway, also I didn't know where else to put this, but I thought this was interesting, and I'm just gonna say it just like this. This was David Fincher's first movie to use a custom configured Panavision Super 35 frame line in which the 239-1 extraction is placed 1/3 of the top of 185-1 with 4-3 safety area. He'll go on to use this framing for his next two films, Fight Club and Panic Room, although the latter film will use a slightly modified configuration to accommodate 3 perf. None of that makes sense to me.
Somebody's been reading American Cinematographer magazine.
Yeah. So I just figured I'd throw that in there for somebody who that was like, oh, that's good info.
Somebody's listening going, whoa, this was the first one?
I knew I recognized this, bro.
Well, Fincher had actually wanted Savides for 7 as his cinematographer on that one, but Savides had just made a film called Heaven's Prisoners for director Phil Jannou, who coincidentally was one of the directors who was offered 7 before Fincher came on board. And whatever happened during the shoot on that film caused Savides to claim that he never wanted to make a movie again. I don't know what. I couldn't find it, but he would eventually end up shooting some second unit stuff for 7, including that iconic opening title sequence that Gary talked about in our last episode. So he was actually the cinematographer on that, which makes sense since he did that 9 Inch Nails Closer video, because it looks like the 9 Inch Nails Closer video and is playing that song.
Right.
And he and Fincher worked to create a very specific look for the film, one that was rich and supple when depicting Nicholas's wealthy lifestyle, taking cues from cinematographer Gordon Willis, especially his work on The Godfather, which featured beautiful, visually appealing locations that had kind of ominous undertones. But once Nicholas left his protected world, Savides let fluorescence, neon signs, and other background lights become overexposed to, as he kind of described it, to let things get a bit wilder out in the real world. And the shoot for the game was kind of a tough one. You know, it was over 100 days long. It was a pretty long shoot, and most of the shoot was on location at night. It was not only physically draining, but mentally draining as well, because with everyone playing so many roles and with so many lies and deceptions within deceptions, you know, it became difficult to keep track of it all, especially since the game, like most movies, was shot out of sequence. And Fincher gives a lot of credit to script supervisor Jamie Babbitt for keeping everything organized in that regard. As a side note, when I read his quote about Jamie Babbitt, I was like, that name sounds familiar. I'm going to look that up. And I can't say that I know a lot of script supervisors' names. No offense to any of our script supervisors out there, but I just don't. Those aren't names that like jump out to me where I'm like, oh yeah, they were the script supervisor on so and so. But this name jumped out, so I looked her up. And I found out that shortly after the game, she began a directing career of her own. Well, she had done some short films, but she did her first feature film in 1999 with But I'm a Cheerleader, which is a movie that I love. And I've actually brought up, I think during our John Waters series, I brought it up because Mink Stoll is in it. So yeah, Jamie Babbitt was the director of that film. And she's continued to be a director, doing mostly television work since then.
Who's in But I'm a Cheerleader? Is that
Natasha?
He just said it, you jackass.
Natasha Lyonne is the main character.
Okay, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah, Natasha Lyonne's in it. The guy who plays Rufio is in it, whose name escapes me right now, and RuPaul Charles is in it. Ironically, RuPaul but I'm going to go on a little side quest here, but I'm a Cheerleader is it's about this girl who her parents think she's a lesbian, so they send her to a gay conversion camp. So, and ironically, RuPaul is the one who plays the character in charge of converting these teenagers who are suspected to be gay. It's a very funny movie. I highly recommend it. It's really good stuff.
Did you just go through that whole list and not even mention the goddess Clea Duvall?
Oh no, I didn't. Yeah, Clea Duvall is also in it. Yeah, she's great.
Yeah. So
so I apologize to you and to Clea Duvall.
Thank you. We accept your apology.
Well, we talked a lot in our first episode of this series about the precision of the editing, specifically in Fincher's music videos. I think we kind of hammered pretty hard on that because it's so obvious, especially once you're looking for it. And I think that's something that you'll find throughout his feature films as well, albeit in a less showy way because they're not, cut to the beat of the music or whatever. But for the game, Fincher reteamed with another technician from his music video days, a guy named James Haygood, who had worked on several videos for him, including the famous Vogue video that we talked a lot about in that episode. He made his feature film debut here on the game and will continue to work with Fincher for his next 2 features. So the next 2 movies we're talking about, James Haygood is the guy there. Fincher also once again teamed with Howard Shore for the film's score. Now, we only briefly mentioned Shore during our discussion of Seven, but I think it's really worth noting his work here, which is some of my favorite work of his career, which is saying something when you're discussing like one of the greatest film composers of all time, the guy who did the Lord of the Rings soundtrack, probably my favorite movie score of all time. Fincher, I found this really interesting quote because Fincher, despite making his name in the world of music videos, says, "I don't think in terms of music. I make the film and then I show it to Howard, and hopefully he's a hell of a lot smarter about it than you are. And he goes, I want to do this." And you just kind of go, fine.
Well, I think that goes back to, him getting the right people and just trusting their work.
He's trusting his composer to do the job that he's hired for, but he knows that this guy knows more than he does. So just let him do his thing. Now, I think he's still being a little bit self-depreciating there. I'm sure that he has some input or some feedback that he'll give Howard Shore every now and then. But generally, he's saying, hey, you know how to do this better than I do, clearly. So just go for it.
Nice.
One group he never seems to have faith in doing anything is he seems to hate the marketing departments always. And so, because I even read on this one, I can't remember if we mentioned it last episode, where I had seen in the interviews where he talks about it. He was like, the marketing department is always there to fix something, even if there's nothing wrong with it. It always seems like they feel like their job is to be like, we got to be able to sell this thing, and it's our job to make it worth it. And so anyway, he did talk about it.
Is. I mean, it is.
Yeah. I mean, it is. That is literally their job. But yeah, he talks about, like, if you look at the initial teaser for this movie, it's got that marionette. Yeah, which is wicked.
It's a cool teaser.
Yeah, and he thought that was the theme he wanted to go with, like, even for the poster and everything. And I guess the marketing department came up with the crumbling, like the face puzzle thing with the puzzle piece coming out of on the puzzle, that. So he added, like, he wanted some of the puzzle piece stuff in the opening credits. He added that in there just to make it match with what marketing had done. But you could tell he was just kind of like, that's not my idea. That was their idea.
Yeah.
So,
honestly, the marionette thing makes more sense for the movie because, he's a puppet. He's being played as opposed to a puzzle. He's not trying to figure out a puzzle necessarily. So actually the marionette thing works better. It's a cool trailer. If you haven't seen it, I'll try to maybe post it on our Instagram or something, but it's basically just this image of a marionette, a little wooden marionette.
It's kind of like it's getting tormented or tortured or something.
Right. Yeah. And you hear dialogue from the film, but you don't really see any footage from the film. And then as the trailer ends, it's like somebody cuts the strings and you just see it fall. And then you only see one moment, I think, from the film, one bit of footage, and that's Michael Douglas coming up out of the water in the scene after the taxi crashes. You see him gasping for air, and that's it.
Yeah.
It's a pretty cool teaser.
Nice.
Yeah, it's pretty wicked. By the way, they did test screenings for this, and so according to Fincher, I guess, right, they had a bunch of people that kept walking out right when Nicholas walks off the ledge. He said people just got up and were like, "Fuck this movie."
They didn't stay for the punchline.
Right.
I wonder if any of those people ever saw it again, and they've for 30 years almost, they've just thought that's how the movie ends.
Yeah, maybe so.
Well, the game was eventually released on September 12th, 1997. It wasn't the runaway smash hit that Seven was, but it was still modestly successful, grossing about $109 million worldwide during its run. It also received considerably more mixed reviews than Seven, although the reviews did tend to lean more towards the positive than negative, although there were a few negative ones here and there. And one of the more memorable reviews published at the time that I found, the Washington Post's Desson Howe wrote, "It's formulaic yet edgy. It's predictable yet full of surprises. How far you get through this tall tale of a thriller before you give up and howl is a matter of personal taste. But there's much pleasure in Fincher's intricate color schemes, his rich sense of decor, his ability to sustain suspense over long periods of time, and his sense of humor." I think that kind of nails it, though. Like, especially that line about how far you get is a matter of personal taste. Like I said earlier in the show, you got to be willing to be along for the ride on this one. You can't go in like nitpicking the plots and or looking for plot holes. The movie almost begs you to look for plot holes a little bit, like looking for them here. And there really aren't any. There's certainly implausibilities though. I mean, the whole premise is implausible. Are you kidding? It's ridiculous. It's silly. So I want to discuss as we kind of like get towards the end here, what is the game about? And I'm going to answer my own question, and then I'll let you guys answer. But what
so you
is
don't
the
really
game
need us for this part.
What is the game about? In the commentary track for it, Fincher says this isn't a movie about real life. It's a movie about movies. And then in another interview I read, he says something similar where he says movies usually make a pact with the audience that says we're going to play it straight. What we show you is going to add up, but we don't do that. In that respect, it's about movies and how movies dole out information. Now, this kind of goes back to my point earlier I made that this movie works more on movie logic than on real world logic. There's a really great website called Little White Lies. There was an essay by Anton Bittel on that website about the game, and he makes a little bit of a note of this, saying the people at CRS operate like a film crew, wrangling a large ensemble of actors and extras, coordinating set pieces, engaging in elaborate stunt work and special effects, and handling one narrative twist after another to lead their very private audience right where they want them. This is a film which not only constantly manipulates the viewer, Nicholas and us, but also reveals the very mechanics of those manipulations. And I love that point of view on this. I love the idea that this is a metaphor for filmmaking almost. Clearly, Fincher's roller coaster ride with Hollywood, from the lows of Alien 3 to the highs of 7, informed his approach to the game, or maybe even is part of what inspired him to really want to make it. But it also proves, I think, that this is a guy who fully understands the language of cinema and the established rules of how stories are told on screen. And by being fluent in those things, he's able to kind of subvert them.
Funny you mentioned Anton Bittel.
Yeah.
Because I read that same thing, The Little White Lies.
Yeah, it's a great article.
Yeah. And my favorite part of it too, I love the film crew idea of it, definitely, but I also love that he called it an inverted parody of capitalism itself, whose structures can be manipulated and whose personnel can be toppled, but which ultimately emerges essentially intact and unscathed by all dramas and intrigues that form its role-playing scenarios. He says the more we display our the more we invest in Nicholas's bank of experiences, the more we display our willing complicity with, even subservience to, a system that lets cocoon elites merely play games on an urban, even international scale, while the rest of us must live our grubby, messy lives in the real world with real consequences. The only lesson that there is to learn about Nicholas, the film's arch capitalist, is just how predictable his conduct is and how untouchable his type ultimately proves to be. Yeah. And I was like, Jesus, Anton,
savage.
But it did make me step back, and I'm like, yeah, it's kind of shitty. This little fucker just good for you, you little rich bastard.
I know he
this game with,
but you know
no
what?
Consequences.
He's a job creator, because all of those people at CRS, all those actors that got hired, they're all being employed because of this game.
Did we just turn Justin into the GOP on this podcast?
Nicholas Van Horton is a job creator. But talking about the way that Fincher utilizes cinematic language and cinematic tools, kind of goes back to our discussion on 7 about the way that he used handheld cameras on that, or rather the lack of handheld camera used in 7. Because as we mentioned then, only a couple of scenes in the movie use that technique, because Fincher knows that it makes those times more impactful than if he were to use it more regularly. Fincher has been quoted as saying, and it might have been in the commentary on this, actually. It might have been where I got this quote, but he says, talking about his filmmaking technique, he says, it's not about what you do, it's about what don't you do. And that's what he's talking about. Like, when do you not choose to use handheld? And in the case of the game, he's explicitly avoiding close-ups of items that are going to have significance later, because doing so kind of gives it all away. There's another quote from the commentary where he says, every time you underline something in a close-up, the audience becomes aware of it and they start to catalog those things. So like which is smart and something that not a lot of filmmakers are in tune with. So instead, he presents everything in a wide frame, and in doing so, the audience gets to experience the movie through Michael Douglas. We're never really given any clues as to what's really happening. We're not like shown things that he doesn't see. Basically, we're with him the whole movie. We don't really have any more information about CRS's game than he has. I mean, in a sense, the audience is also playing the game, with the true nature of it not being revealed to us until it's revealed to Nicholas at the very end of the film. And I think that makes for a more rewarding viewing experience.
Yeah, no, I'd have to agree. I mean, going back to your question of, so what is the game about? I mean, we've explored a lot of different aspects already, with the Christmas stuff, and with what you guys just said about capitalism and the government, and looking at anybody who controls any sort of source of information, I think could be sort of an examination of that through this movie. I think on a surface level, I think if you're asking people who have just let the film wash over them and just let this be an experience, I think their go-to would probably be appreciating your life, because it can fall apart, it can go away very quickly. But yeah, I don't know. I think this is one I didn't think this was a movie that had more layers to it, but asking a couple questions and looking at a couple things, like this is a lot deeper than I initially gave it credit for. And
yeah.
I
well, it's easy to get caught up in the twists and turns, and then
right. Not that I didn't enjoy
so exciting.
Exactly. Not that I didn't enjoy the film before, but it's just kind of like there are a lot of layers to this onion. It does. I was like, well, I already know how it ends. It's like, it's a good movie, but I don't really need to revisit it. But like I said earlier, just the comparison of, Nicholas Van Orton to Scrooge, like, makes me want to go watch the movie again.
See,
see what else I can grab out of it.
I think that this is a movie that's like a very rewarding on rewatch. Because I granted, I mean, when the first time you watch it, it's exhilarating because nothing in the film really functions the way that it would in a normal film. So you don't really know what to expect, but Fincher, we mentioned this, I think, Gary, I think you mentioned it originally, maybe in our Alien 3 episode. We brought it up again last time. Fincher doesn't make a movie. Remember that quote where he says he doesn't make a movie for someone who's going to see it one time. He makes a movie for the guy who's going to see it 5 times. He wants a movie to be a rewarding experience no matter how many times you see it. And for those who've seen the game multiple times, you're met with fresh surprises every time you watch it. Much like 7, I think knowing where it ends up enriches the viewing experience on rewatch, because you find yourself looking for clues, and clues that Fincher is so careful not to highlight, but they're there, but he's not doing a close-up on them. But if you're looking, and if you're watching this movie for the 4th or 5th time, you're going to pick up on stuff like that. You're going to pick up on little things that are foreshadowing things that are going to happen later on, that you would never have even known to look for had you not already seen the film.
There's little things here and there. This one had fun stuff, just like the last one. That, like, I mean, I think Deborah Kara Unger is a waitress in the restaurant where Conrad.
You just see her like in the background,
yeah, she's in the background as a waitress, like in I don't know, just kind of interesting stuff like that. I also, I mean, I like the idea that Fincher. We talked about the dive off the building and everything here too, but he seems to really be focused in on, if I had to think of a theme on a lot of stuff, it's like the loneliness of a person, and like the sadness, and like the and that could lead to whatever, but just in general, just the tones like the colors he uses, the tone he has in most of these places. But if you think of the leads so far in all of these movies, there's this sense of, first of all, loneliness. And then I also think the idea of trying to get control of your life. And that's happened, I would say, from even Ripley being brought back into the prison colony. And I think that happens with like, if you think of Somerset and but by both detectives actually and Seven, like they're both like, Brad Pitt's trying to get control coming into this world because he wants control of what's going on, and he's just trying to control where his world's going, and then butts up against the fact that you can't. And then you got the guy like Somerset dealing with this loneliness, or Morgan Freeman's like trying to get out of the situation and escape all this. And then you're back to this one where there's this rich guy, just a lonely Scrooge dude living in a high tower, and is used to having control over everything, and then it's ripped away from you, and that sort of thing. I don't know. I just love that aspect of it so far, and I think that's going to continue for him. I think a little bit.
I think you could also add Obsession to that list as a list of recurring themes. I mean, that goes all the way back to Alien 3 with Ripley. I mean, she has that line where she says, "You've been in my life for so long that I don't know anything else." Like, she's obsessed with these guys. I mean, Mills is obsessed in Seven, more so than Somerset, but Somerset is to an extent, and John Doe is obsessed. I mean, and that goes here. I mean, the obsession with finding I mean, in the case of the game, it's a lot easier because obviously there is something he's trying to figure out. So obviously the obsession comes from a very natural place, but that's something we're going to see a lot throughout his filmography. And that I think really culminates in Zodiac when we get to that one. But, and I'm glad you brought that up, Gary, because when you're watching these movies, like I said earlier, when you're watching them, especially side by side, like we're doing, you start to see all these different parallels. And I think more than almost any other director we've talked about, like they're becoming very apparent with David Fincher. I mean, they were very apparent. I'd say other than Fincher, I'd say David Cronenberg is someone that you could see a lot of different things like come up again and again. But when I was watching this one this time, one thing I realized about it that I never really clocked on past viewings was some of these other parallels with Seven specifically. Because remember, when I was thinking about the name of the series, I came up with the idea that Fincher likes to depict games in his films. Now, obviously, that's pretty obvious here where that comes from, the name of the movie. But also, that sequence in Alien 3 where they're trying to trap the alien queen or trap the alien in the where the molten lead is going to fall on it. That's kind of, they're like playing chess almost with that alien. But you can also apply it to Seven, I think, which is a movie that is really a series of games perpetuated by John Doe. And in that film, Mills, like Nicholas Van Orden, is a participant in those games, even if he's unaware of it. And John Doe, like many other characters in Fincher's films, is driven not only by obsession, but by purpose, which is something you could also apply to CRS. Like, there's a reason for these games that they're playing, and that's to make Van Orton hopefully a better person and make him appreciate his life. But they're driven by purpose, just like John Doe is driven by purpose. And I think that's probably something we're going to see pop up again on some of these other episodes as we go further through Fincher's filmography. But more and more, I've also just come to appreciate Fincher's skill as a director. I mean, the precision in every shot, every costume, every decision that's made, every location, everything that worked so well for him in Seven serves him just as well here. There's just like, this is a film that the script really works like clockwork. It has to, or it doesn't work at all, with every piece put precisely in its place. And I think because the script was written with that precision in place, it makes Fincher, who's such a precision-driven director, just the perfect match for this story. Much like Seven, I think, had the game ended up in another director's hands, I doubt that we'd still be talking about it now. If Jonathan, and I'd like Jonathan Mostow, the year that Seven came out, Breakdown came out with Kurt Russell, and I watched that movie for the first time a few months ago, and I adore it. I think it's great. Now, Jonathan Mostow later on, he started doing, like Terminator 3 and stuff that I don't care about, but I'll always go to bat for him just for Breakdown. But I still don't think that he could have given us as memorable a movie as David Fincher did. Just like if, Jeremiah Chechik had done Seven, would we still be talking about Seven? Probably not, because both of those seem like the perfect meeting of like story and filmmaker. Like, it feels like they were destined to be David Fincher's. He's the only one that could have brought either of those really to the screen in such a powerful and still very entertaining way. That's what's great about him. It's like his movies are made for audiences. People, they're made to be entertaining. So it was always going to be hard for the game to meet the expectations set by Seven, both critically and especially commercially, because Seven was just such a smash hit. But even with a lesser success, it did continue to prove that Fincher had the goods and could produce a good money-making film that audiences would enjoy. His next movie, however, would call that reputation into question. Although it's become one of the director's most popular films in the 25 years since its release, when it was originally unleashed upon audiences in 1999, Fincher's follow-up to the game was both a critical and commercial disappointment. And that is, of course, the story we'll be telling on our next episode as we explore the story behind David Fincher's Fight Club.
Woo!
Well, that's going to be interesting. Yeah, I didn't realize that it was a disappointment. Honestly,
it did not do well. It did not find its. I didn't either for years because I saw it in the theater, so I just assumed everyone else did, I guess. But it did not. It did not do well. It did not meet expectations, we'll say.
Also, I don't want to be that guy, but I'd like to point out that you just broke the first fucking rule. So,
well, to be fair, our entire next episode is just going to be nothing but breaking the rule.
That's right. That's
we
what
have
we do.
to. Otherwise, it wouldn't be much of a podcast if we weren't able to talk about it.
Yeah,
no shirt, no shoes. Anybody taps, goes lip, says I'm done, gotta stop. And if it's your first listen, you have to fight.
Oh, you're taking Todd's job from him for the next episode.
Gary!
Oh, I wasn't even thinking about it.
Damn it!
This is going to be great.
That's all we got for this week, folks. We'll be back in 2 weeks with our next episode of the David Fincher series. Until then, you fellas want to let the listeners know where you can be found on the internet.
This is Gary Horne. Just look at that. That's where I am.
I like that. Straight and to the point. And now on the opposite end of the spectrum, here's Todd.
My show, Computer Resume Podcast, is available wherever you get your podcasts. We're covering the entire Star Trek franchise in chronological orders. Right now, we are hip deep in our coverage of Strange New Worlds, and we've got some very exciting guests coming soon. You can find us at Computer Resume on Facebook, X, Instagram, TikTok, Venmo, and Patreon. And I am at Mr. Todd A. Davis on Facebook, X, Instagram, Letterboxd, and D&D Beyond, as long as they behave themselves.
I mean, I don't know if this really helps, but I'm at This is Gary Horne on Venmo too.
Yeah. I just wants to fucking send me money. Shit. I'm probably at Justin_Bishop. I don't know, but just search for me. I don't just if you find a Justin Bishop on there, send us all money. We all deserve it. I am at Justin_Bishop. Twitter, X, Twitter/X, Instagram, and Letterboxd. You can also find the show at cinema_shock. That's on Letterboxd. That's on X. That's on Instagram. We're on Facebook. We're also at cinemashock.net, where you can find our archive of all of our episodes, all of our past episodes. You can find links to our Discord. You can buy merch. You can buy Cinema Shock t-shirts. I've got some ideas for new t-shirts that I'm hoping to get up there pretty soon. And rate, review, listen. You are listening. Send this to all of your friends any way you know how. Anyone you know who loves movies, send them our way. Until next time,
may the wings of liberty never lose a feather.
And be excellent to each other.
You really believe that just because you publish children's books, people are going to care about the keys? You can have pictures of Johnny wearing nipple rings, butt-fucking Captain Kangaroo. The only thing they care about is the stock and whether that stock is up or down.
Really glad we worked butt fucking into this episode.
I ran across that quote and I was just like, yep, that's it. That's the one.
It's honestly, it's a failure if we didn't. So that's good.